سوف نبقى هنا كي يزول الألم سوف نحيا هنا سوف يحلو النغم موطني ذا اللباب موطني يا أنا رغم كيد العدا رغم كل النقم سوف نسعى إلى أن تعم النعم سوف نرنو إلى رفع كل الهمم بالمسير للعلا ومناجاة القمم فلنقم كلنا بالدواء والقلم كلنا عفو على من يصارع السقم فلنواصل.
الحمد لله رب العالمين. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. Dear brothers, today we have a very, very special guest, someone who has returned back to Islamic Oasis, someone that we love, respect, honor, and we hope and we pray that we have more and more men like this in the Ummah. Someone who understands, not only understands, but has gone through the struggle of this Ummah in general. In many ways, actually, I think also represents the struggle of this Ummah till today. And that is our brother Moazzam Begg. Many of you know who he is. He is the director of CAGE, the London-based advocacy organization, which aims to empower communities impacted by war on terror. He is an activist for issues pertaining to the Muslim communities around the world. Previously, had spent time in Guantanamo Bay. Many of you know, heard podcasts, probably articles. A lot has been talked about on this issue. After being abducted and detained in Afghanistan, Brother Moazzam Begg, welcome back to Islamic Oasis.
My pleasure to be here again with you.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Brother Moazzam, let's begin this thing. First of all, you were in Afghanistan. Actually, it seems like many times since we spoke last. Let me ask you this about your own trip. But what do you think is happening in the region, Sheikh? I'm sure you're politically aware of the situation in Pakistan itself, the Balochistan situation, Waziristan situation, Afghanistan. Pakistan is stuck in the middle. There's India very active. What do you think is happening in the region, Sheikh, as far as your observations since you've been there?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. First of all, brother, I think, for me, returning to Afghanistan has been indicative of the change that's happening in the region. So if somebody like me can go to Afghanistan after all these years, after the US occupation, NATO's occupation, it suggests now things have changed dramatically. And part of that change is, of course, Afghanistan is there. The Taliban, the Islamic Emirate, are now back in power. They're stronger than they've ever been before in the past. And in the region, there are definitely convulsions. In Pakistan, there's this whole movement now that was begun by Imran Khan, that for the first time ever in Pakistan, people are speaking out against the military. It never happened before. Throughout the history of Pakistan, the military was almost muqaddas, it was almost sacred. And people didn't speak out against the military because of what they were doing in the northwest frontier region, in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, of killing essentially Pashtuns for the past 20 years. But because of what happened with Imran Khan's party and his imprisonment. So there's that kind of convolution that's happening in Pakistan. When I was in Afghanistan the last time, they would, deplorably expelled or begun the expulsion of 1.5 million Afghan refugees. Many of them were on the border, inside the border, in tents, little children in the winter. And it's inexcusable to treat people like this. Although most of the people of Pakistan have been very welcoming to the Afghans, the government was mistreating them. As a result of that, I think much of Afghanistan, even prior to this though, they've built a resilience in which they aren't reliant. I mean, they trade with Pakistan, of course, that will continue. The relations will continue, but they don't become reliant on the politics of Pakistan or the politics of the United States, and they seek help, assistance, trade elsewhere. But as a result, become a lot more fiercely independent on based upon the regional powers that have all, as you said correctly, tried to gain some kind of influence in Afghanistan. Everybody's, all the great game has always been to try to gain influence in Afghanistan. But what it has produced over these years is a fierce independence as a result of that attempt to take over. And of course, that fierce independence comes primarily from their Islamic identity, which is one of the things I think that there's overt fear in some places and covert fear in other places. But very clearly, the Islamic identity has been stamped very visibly in Afghanistan.
Sheikh, your observations again as far as development of Afghanistan. I mean, I've been there twice. I mean, obviously you've been there many, many a times. What I observed was a lot of minds during this situation after Taliban takeover. They had left. Are you seeing a lot more people coming back? Rebuilding of Afghanistan happening. Institutions are being rebuilt. And what do you see as far as the kind of needs that need to be addressed?
Well, one of the things I think it's important that we look at what Afghanistan was and what it is now. If I compare it to when I was there in 2001 and now, I can't recognize it. The home where I used to live in, the areas, the markets, the bazaars. There are some masajid that are there. There are one or two restaurants that are still there from my time.
You were there in Kandahar or Kabul, Sheikh? Where did you stay?
I was in Kabul. Okay. I lived in Kabul, yes. I visited many other places, of course, but I lived in Kabul. And it has changed so much as beyond recognition. The only thing that doesn't change and hasn't changed for sure are the mountains.
Did you go to the major cafe in Kabul? Have that tea they have there. There's a nice cafes now in Kabul.
There's so many cafes. There's so many. That's the thing. There's cafes. There's even, there's places, shopping malls there where they, they sell every kind of food. Turkish restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Yemeni restaurants. I mean, there's so much available there now. But really, these are all the kind of the trappings of modernity. But what Afghanistan really has shown itself to be in terms of the leadership there at the moment that I've seen, and I know that many of the leadership, because they were with us in Guantanamo for 12, 13, 14 years. And as part of its leadership is people with a very broad understanding of the world, even of the Americans, I would say, because they've been in their custody, and of the West. And they're not infatuated by it anymore. They've seen the worst it can give. And they want to get the best. They want to get the best for all of the people. And this is not the Taliban of 2001, by the way. These are maturer, older, more experienced people. One of the things that people are very clearly, you can see, is that the lack of corruption. If you compare it to Pakistan next door, it's Pakistan massively corrupt. And the presence of the deep state. There's no presence of the deep state acting in Afghanistan. There's been an entire change of leadership. So whatever deep state existed no longer exists. I think the benchmark is to see other people, ordinary people who are not Talibs, not even. I even met people who are critical of Taliban, very critical, in fact, openly critical.
Yeah, Kabul. It seems you can hear the people talk. I mean, they say, look. I mean, people say maybe another 2 years, 3 years. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it's kind of allowed and no one says anything as far as...
Yeah, I mean, of course, to a degree, yes, it's a new place, it's a new government, but criticism does exist, and but the criticism that I hear from people who say that what we don't want is a return to war. We've had enough war. We need a time for development and dialogue and understanding and so forth. And there are few, and most, I think, those are the guys in the West who are pushing for some kind of a war again. I don't know, on what basis are you going to start a war again? NATO was defeated there. That's it. There's no other way to say it. NATO withdrew in humiliation. So what war are you going to start, and with whom, and who's going to have the ability to continue that? So in in the absence of war, you must build upon peace, even if you disagree with one another. And I think that that's a place where the leadership of the Emara is trying hard to maintain, despite all of the attacks that are happening from whether it's the former government, left over from the former government in different areas, or whether it's more insidious like ISIS that are carrying out attacks regularly in that region. But I'm seeing development. I'm seeing the building of roads, the building of this giant canal that's going to span the entire country. There's building of bridges, the roads. I tell you, there's some roads I can tell you that I've seen driving through Kabul and saying, wow, that's far cleaner than the roads I live around in Birmingham, in inner city Birmingham.
They are very clean, that's for sure. Yes, you do see a lot of cleaning going on and things like this. Yeah. Sheikh, let me go ahead.
Country.
I'm sorry, say that.
No, I say it's a beautiful country.
Yeah.
I said it's a beautiful country. I went to Banda Amir, to Bamiyan, to that region around there, which is absolutely wonderful. And they're opening up for tourism. Just now, somebody sent me something, said that they're offering skiing holidays in Bamiyan, which is unbelievable. I never imagined that would ever happen.
Oh, subhanallah. So, I mean, now is travel to Afghanistan, has it been easier, Sheikh? I mean, no, it's obviously because of all of the history of Afghanistan and what has happened there, people still, think twice before traveling to Afghanistan. But
people. I mean, people are coming and going all the time. Non-Muslims are coming all the time. Women are traveling on their own. People who have never been there before. People are making video logs about Afghanistan, traveling to different parts of it, to Nuristan, to Bamiyan, to wherever. I've been there twice since in last year, and I'll be going again. And I've gone every time with some non-Muslims who are seeing the place for the first time, and are really, they're completely shocked. And one of the most beautiful things is, even if you get stopped at a checkpoint by an armed soldiers, my experience has always been they will say things like "Khafanis," that don't be angry, please don't be angry with us. When does a police officer ever say that to you when he's stopping and searching you? They want to present an image of being soft and not harsh on ordinary people, which I think is the right way to go.
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, a bit of shift. We probably, by the way, I did hear, I'm sure you know that Asim Munir was in town here in the US a few weeks ago and things like this. And there, at least from what I heard from some of the journalists, that there was a talk of Pakistan doing operations inside Afghanistan. Is this, I know you were saying that there's a push, at least again, by some Western countries. I mean, is this, did you have this discussion ever? I mean, were they thinking that there could be another type of?
I think, there's this constant statement by people in Pakistan. I mean, the latest one, I think it was Asim Munir or somebody else, said this apparently terrible statement, which was something along the lines of, one Pakistan is worth more than the whole of Afghanistan together. It's a terrible statement. It's a disgusting statement for anybody to make. Pakistan and Afghanistan are brotherly nations. They should continue to be brotherly nations. They should continue to have good relations. There's only two countries in the world that have shalwar qameez as the national dress. Yeah. And that's Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's not Pakistan and India. It's not Pakistan and Iran. It's just these two countries. The peoples of the Northwest Frontier Province, or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and the Pashtuns of Afghanistan are the one people. There's so much that connects them. So when they start to talk about this, Pakistan has a terrible, terrible role it played in the war on terror.
Yeah.
And forget about handing over Afghans, which they did. They handed over the Afghani ambassador, Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif, who I visited in Afghanistan now that he's back from Guantanamo. But they handed me over. They handed me over. The Pakistanis handed me over to the Americans without any legal process. Forget me. They handed Aafia Siddiqui over without any legal process. And they handed two brothers who were recently returned now from Guantanamo after 21 years. 21 years. The Rabbani brothers, Ghulam Rabbani and Ahmed Rabbani, they just came back now. They handed their own citizens over for money. So Pakistan has played a terrible role for which they're not in any moral position to start to attack Afghanistan, especially those people who they played a role in dismantling their government. So I hope that reason sees through, and that the push to create more animosity between the two countries doesn't continue.
Do you think that's a strategic thing? Is that pushed by India, or is that pushed by United States?
I don't know. I mean, the answer probably is yes, to some degree, a little bit of all of that. But again, Pakistan is a sovereign nation. It has its own interests, and its interests should, at least regionally, align with brotherly nations.
Yeah.
And if anything comes along to upset that, and they start the terrible, terrible disease of ultranationalism starts to overtake that of the brotherly Islamic relations, then they need to be told under, with little doubt how Islam regards that kind of nationalism, that it is akin to a form of kufr, of disbelief, when you start to say that my nationality supersedes that of my relationship with Islam.
Sheikh, Aafia Siddiqui, you mentioned. What is her status, Sheikh? I mean, her sister was here a couple of times in the U.S. She gave a couple of talks, things like this. I think she was allowed to even meet with her sister. And then there was a little talk about she may be released. There was one of the politicians, I don't know if he's a politician, from Pakistan. He came with her. He spoke at some of the masajid, things like this. What are you expecting, Sheikh?
So one of the people I returned to Afghanistan with, I went back to Afghanistan with, was my lawyer, who I first ever met in Camp Echo in Guantanamo Bay. His name is Clive Stafford Smith. He's been fighting for the Guantanamo prisoners since that time till now, and I was the first person to be seen by him. He has taken on the case of Aafia Siddiqui over the past couple of years, and together we went to Afghanistan and we met with people we discovered based on connections we had with former prisoners in Bagram. A brother who was held next to Aafia Siddiqui, right in a cell, right next to her for a whole month, an Afghani brother. He told us in detail. We took full testimony from him about how he used to hear screams, and he used to try to tell her. She didn't speak Pashto, he didn't speak Urdu, but he used to try to give her patience. And he remembers, he told us the detail of how he remembers when she was left and he just saw her clothes, her orange clothing, and he asked that they give it to him, and they didn't. But we've taken his full testimony about all the things that he saw and witnessed. We also met a brother who was physically present and intervened in attempting to stop her being taken into custody in Afghanistan when she was detained in Ghazni. We took his testimony, and he's being a very, very, he said, I wish that I would have died rather than let her be taken away in the way that she was. We've gone to the police station where she allegedly did that. The whole reason why they claim she was arrested and convicted in the first place. We went to that very place, the scene of the crime, as it were, where she's supposed to have attempted to shoot an American soldier. We're trying to get hold of the witnesses who were present, who saw exactly what happened. I know a lot of them have left the country now, but we're just saying that, look, we have assurances from the Islamic Emirate that no one will be harmed. We just want testimony from people, because everything we believe in, everything we've seen, everything we understand suggests that whatever happened, whatever the reason why Aafia was arrested and convicted has not been properly interrogated according to a meaningful legal process. So we're trying to uncover all of that. And Clive Stafford Smith has visited Aafia several times now in prison. I think he came to the US and he toured with the Senator Mushtaq and Fawzia Siddiqui. One of the wonderful moments we had in Afghanistan was when I was seated with Clive and these two witnesses that I was mentioning to you. And we did a video call with Fawzia Siddiqui, Aafia's sister, and I got them all to speak to her. And it was a very, very moving moment because these guys were saying that we will do whatever we can from ourselves as witnesses to what happened, to help Aafia get home.
Sheikh, I mean, do you think they're not letting her go because the shame that it can bring again to United States in general? Because I mean, obviously, I think they might make conditions that she cannot speak, she cannot. There may be those conditions, but are they worried that this will become international? Some type of a.
Well, when we say they, we're talking about the US. Or Pakistan.
Yeah, US, yeah. Pakistan. Everyone involved.
I don't think the US
really.
I don't think the US cares that much. I think the Pakistanis do. Pakistani people. If you were to ask ordinary US citizens, have you ever heard of Aafia Siddiqui? Most will say, "I've never heard of her. I don't know who you're talking about." But if you were to ask ordinary Pakistani citizens, everybody will know her. So you see, obviously, that's where the pressure lies. Why doesn't Aafia return to Pakistan? Well, who handed her over? And why did they hand her over? And what was the process? And then someone's going to have to answer for that. I think they don't even have to make the kind of a gag order on Aafia, because she's not well anymore. She's not normal anymore. She's not in a normal state anymore. She's been brutalized. She's been violated. She's been sexually, physically violated, separated from her children. How would you be at the end of that? One of her children lost, and then given a ridiculous 86-year sentence for nobody was harmed. She was the only one that was shot in the whole of that so-called process. And there are people who've killed American soldiers in battle who are now free. So it doesn't make sense that Aafia is paying this massive price. And so I don't think that Aafia herself will be the problem, in the sense that she's going to go around telling the media, they did this to me and they did that to me. I think she'll need so much time for recovery. The problem for Pakistan or anywhere else is the ordinary person on the street will be asking, what happened to Aafia now that she's home? We want to know. And who's responsible? But that shouldn't be the reason for Aafia to remain in prison, their fear of embarrassment. That's not a reason to keep a person in prison.
You know, in the conversation, Sheikh, they always say that it's Pakistan that's not allowing her to come back in. That's what Americans always... This is the reply, that it's okay, fine, we can let her go, but who's going to take her? Well, she needs to go back to Pakistan. But although she's an American citizen.
Well, she can and should go back to Pakistan. Her family is there. Her sister's there. Her mother died last year.
Yeah.
So the children are all there. So that's where she should go to, where she grew up and where she has all the connections. But even people in Afghanistan have said, if they won't let her back there, bring her here. So it's not that people don't want to. Where will she go? There's people who will take her because of the humanitarian connection and Islamic connection. It's what will Pakistan do if another country says, yes, we'll take her? That will make Pakistan look bad, really bad. So it seems that at least some people in Pakistan, not everybody, I'm sure, is happy for her to remain where she is.
Do they? I mean, can you go in and out of Pakistan yourself?
I think technically I can. I just haven't. But I'm sure technically I can. Who knows? The world, as I said, if they can arrest and imprison a man like Imran Khan.
Oh, yes.
I don't know.
There is no one.
I don't know what to say. Pakistan is the country that handed me over to the Americans. Having said that, I have been back to Pakistan about 10 odd years ago. So who knows?
Sheikh, there is a lot of development taking place also in UK, where you are. The proscription of Hizb Tahrir as a terrorist organization. What's happening, Sheikh? Has UK become completely bankrupt as far as ideological, as an ideological nation? It cannot argue its points anymore. It's so the only thing left is just ban even organizations like Hizb Tahrir.
Yes, I mean, one of the things is that Britain has a long history of banning different organizations and groups and so forth, and as terrorist organizations, because they were involved in violence, which you could There's a case, of course, for that, and you can understand where that's coming from, even if you might not agree with all of them.
Sure.
But banning an organization like Hizb ut-Tahrir, which by its nature is non-violent, it's by its nature. It doesn't. There's never been a history, never been a single case of a Hizb ut-Tahrir member joining an Islamic organization or group or militant group and going to fight or carrying out operations or bombings or terrorist activities in Europe. It's never happened. There's not a single case. If they wanted to, during the 20 years of the war on terrorism, when Hizb ut-Tahrir was very vocal, very vocal against Britain's presence in Iraq and Afghanistan, they could have banned them. They could have banned them when, after all, Hizb ut-Tahrir has been calling for Khilafah right from the beginning till now. And then a Khilafah came. A Khilafah was established, a so-called Khilafah, bogus Khilafah as far as I'm concerned. But
yes, of course.
nonetheless,
The ISIS in
Iraq
Syria,
and
Iraq.
yeah, Syria. And so they could have banned them then, but they didn't do that either. They did it now. And look at which point they did it. They did it at the very point when Israel is facing allegations at the International Court of Justice for genocide, is the time they decide we're going to ban Hizb ut-Tahrir. And so it doesn't make any sense. Even when they say, oh, they were calling for jihad. Well, Britain supports jihad whenever it suits its purpose, right? So when Libyan Mujahideen were fighting against Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, the British RAF were bombing Colonel Gaddafi. So they were happy to support jihad whenever it suits them, right? So one of the arguments is, they've called for jihad against Israel. Well, what does that make it terrorism? If you believe jihad is terrorism, then you should be in the dock because you supported Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the past against the Soviets, and you did it again against Gaddafi most recently. But this is the way it's going. It seems as if Israel has a grip on Western nations, the likes of which they don't have on themselves. They didn't go this far, even when British soldiers were dying in Iraq and Afghanistan. They didn't go this far. And you have to wonder why.
So what now? But what's the environment like in UK, Sheikh? With because now if they can do it to the Hizb, I mean, were you worried? I mean, people like you who are working so much in with so many different even governments and organizations, you're involved in so much. You're dealing with very people with a lot of history. Does that affect your work and who you are and your security in UK?
The thing is, over the past 20 years, they've used so much on me and people around me. Imprisonment, torture, detention without trial, passport removal, passport revocation 3 times in 15 years. Being stopped at the airport every time I traveled. That was, used to happen every time under Schedule 7, which is a law that's almost just totally disproportionately applies to Muslims. Repeated closure of bank accounts. I'm talking about 15 bank accounts, one after the other, open one, close, open one, close. So all of this is happening. And then on top of that, being targeted in the media, in the newspapers, on the tabloids, being called, all of that. So I think, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to me? Are you going to shoot me, kill me? So I'll continue to work, inshallah, as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deems that to be my destiny. And otherwise, the rest is in the hands of Allah.
Of course, Sheikh. But was this coming? I mean, from your understanding, what happened to the Hizb here in the UK? Was that coming, or were you ever surprised?
There have been attempts.
With your
there have been attempts.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there have been attempts to proscribe Hizb ut-Tahrir, and those attempts have repeatedly failed. And that is because the definition of terrorism in the West, and there's hundreds of them, but one of them is the use of violence for a political or ideological aim. Now, again, I say, if there's no violence involved, you can't ban them. So now you've really banned them because ideology. So I think, inshallah, I hope the brothers here will be challenging it. But it says a lot. It says a lot because they were even trying to ban, there was a point at which they were trying to ban the Muslim Brotherhood here. And again, so you have to ask yourself, this is coming from a particular place. And really, if you go back to the roots of it, it's the Zionist lobby. The Zionist lobby.
In the UK even?
in the UK, in the United States of America,
Right.
and ultimately it's coming from Israel. And all of this is coming from Israel, a country that is involved in genocide. Literally, it's involved in genocide. And I think that ethnic cleansing, genocide, apartheid laws, all of those things that are descriptions of the worst nations with the worst crimes on the planet. All of that is unraveling essentially the international community and its laws. Its pretense at following and believing in these international laws simply don't apply. And I think that's what's happening here. So there's an intention. There was definitely an intention before in the past to try to proscribe Hizb ut-Tahrir, and now they've found a way to do it. The problem Hizb ut-Tahrir had in parliament is that nobody was going to come to defend, not necessarily Hizb ut-Tahrir, but the idea of banning an organization that's not involved in violence. You put them on the terrorist list, though they're not involved in violence. So nobody wanted to put their head above the parapet because, again, the Zionist lobby is very. It doesn't have big numbers, but it's powerful. But I think this is the first time. Hizb ut-Tahrir is one of the sacrificial lambs in all of this. But it is everybody's seeing it for what it is as a result of it.
So now, Sheikh, you in your travels in Afghanistan, Pakistan, here, all of these places, when I'm sure the discussions of Palestine has come up and what's happening there, what are they thinking, Sheikh? I mean, are you surprised at the response of the Muslim world? Number one, I mean, there's barely been any response as far as, it's been deafening, to be honest. And genocide continues on. What were your observations, and what are your observations? What's happening, Sheikh?
Generally, if you go to here on the streets of Britain, we'll start from the streets of Britain here and then move on. Every week there are demonstrations. Every week in places where people are just politically inactive. They wouldn't take part. Even in the regions, even some of the masajid, packed. Everybody wants to talk about Palestine. You're seeing the flags of Palestine everywhere. I went to South Africa recently. Again, everywhere you go, Palestinian flags everywhere. When I went to Afghanistan, interestingly, there's a mosque that's been built on a hill in an area called Wazir Akbar Khan. And this masjid is like no other masjid you'll see anywhere. It's built as a replica of the Dome of the Rock. So it looks exactly like the Dome
of Kabul, isn't it? Though they have that.
Yes. Yeah. I used to live just behind there, before when I was many years ago. And they have a big flag of the La ilaha illallah right there.
Yeah.
And so regularly they have there. Regularly they have gatherings there and speeches and talks and marches and demonstrations right there. And the people's heart is clearly with the people of Gaza. In fact, recently I just saw this podcast, a travelogue, where a young Palestinian man, it's in Arabic, and he's walking through Afghanistan, telling people about the food here, the culture, and so forth and so forth. And whenever they ask him, where are you from? And this is, by the way, Shias and Sunnis are saying the same thing. They're asking, where are you from? He says, I'm from Palestine. And they say to him, please, could you just help us a way to go there? Please find us a way. We want to go there and help to liberate our brothers. And that's like it's a sentiment right across. It's a natural sentiment to want to help to liberate the oppressed, right? It's just natural for especially when you're seeing a genocide. And so there is that feeling, but in the end, people are not in control. The governments are in control. And that unfortunately has shown itself that Palestine is a region surrounded by Muslim nations, but that is of no avail to them whilst this genocide happens.
So you were in South Africa also? I didn't know that, Sheikh.
I went there.
So in South Africa, with this, them taking Israel to court, or at least taking them to task, why do you think that is, Sheikh? Of course, they have had history of apartheid, and that obviously makes a big deal there. But when you are in South Africa, and the Muslims there in South Africa, and is this... no one has taken such a stand, at least to show that they care. And there have been other nations who have this kind of history, but South Africa kind of took the front line.
So South Africa has very interesting history connected to Israel. I believe that the largest number of Israelis outside of Israel before apartheid fell apart was in South Africa. They had a lot of control. There was a lot of Israeli control. There was a connection with and recognition of apartheid South Africa, and Israel. So there was a worldwide boycott of South Africa, even when it came to sports and so forth. But Israel maintained the relationship. So there's history there, and so when you have literally a revolution, Mandela comes into power. He's very supportive and is part of the movement of the Global South. And one of the statements he makes, and to this day resonates so much, is that our freedom is not complete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And he said that in a very meaningful way. Therefore, if you ask Israeli governments, past or present, what's your view of Mandela? They don't like him. They don't like Mandela. And there's not many people around the world who don't like Mandela. So what this tells you is that this is where the history comes from. And they say there's 3 reports by 3 recognized international human rights bodies: Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and an organization called Beit Salam, which is an Israeli Jewish organization. Each one of them has said that Israel, they said this in 2020, operates apartheid laws. So we are right in saying that Israel is not only a genocidal state, it's not only a state that carries out ethnic cleansing according to the United Nations reports long before October the 7th, it's also a nation that operates apartheid laws. Now, South Africa was boycotted by the whole world because of apartheid. And yet here, it's as if nobody wants to even accept that first premise. And because they didn't accept the first premise, it allows Israel to do what it does now. So South Africa says, we know what an apartheid state looks like. We fought against it. We were born out of its ashes. So we will stand with the Palestinians and take this position. And again, it's unfortunate. No Muslim country did that. Indonesia did follow suit, and they took out a case against the Israelis in the West Bank just recently for I believe for ethnic cleansing of and the settlements. So there is, but South Africa has definitely set the way forward, even though we know nothing's enforceable. There won't be Israeli leaders being arrested and taken to courts and stuff like that. But at least we can say, if the United States, if the United Kingdom, if the European Union, if Australia, Canada continue to support Israel if and when it's found guilty, then they will be in breach of international law, and it is possible for those countries then to be treated as supporters of genocide.
Sheikh, in your observation, where is the Muslim world moving? I mean, what's happening? When you look at a broad picture, you come back home, now you're sitting in your home, and when you look at the Muslim world, where are we going, Sheikh? What does the future look like?
In the one sense, if you see it how the Muslim world was at the time of the defeat of by the Mongols, 1258, the Khilafah was destroyed, and politically, you think if you look back at that time, you think, well, Islam must be destroyed, must be finished. This is the capital. The Mongols, nothing's stopping the Mongols. They're the most powerful force on earth, and yet within 100 years, all the Mongols have become Muslims. Within 100 years, the White Horde, the Golden Horde, Barke Khan, and all of that region to this day are descendants. Myself, my family, we're descendants of Mongols. We are actually descendants. And so the whole point in saying this, why is this important? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. That they wish to extinguish the light of Allah with their mouths, and Allah protects His light even though the pagans detest it. Muslims are being defeated all over the place, except Afghanistan, I have to say. Afghanistan is the repeated place where you see victory against superpowers. And that should teach us a lesson.
Why do you've been there a long time. What is it there, Sheikh? I mean, is it the nature of the region, nature of just the country, the way it is? It was much more easier to fight back. I mean, for instance, if I talk, I guess from geography perspective, you look at Gaza is a flat land. There's no way to hide, right? I mean, and then you look at Mosul. I remember when Americans were bombing Mosul at one point, 4 to 5 weeks, they killed 11,000 people in Mosul, and in Mosul, you could at least go to the countryside, and if not, the death toll would have been huge, much more than it would have been the same as what Israel is doing in Gaza. So, is it the will of the people? Is it the geography, or is it both? What makes the people of Afghanistan the way they are?
So it's a mixture of all of those things. And there's and a strong commitment that's been born out of the battlefield to Islam and the concept of defending themselves through jihad. That's what they believe. They very much say it. Even those who fought against the Taliban say we were doing jihad. So there's this kind of thing that they have built between in the kind of DNA that's over a period of time. Geography plays a big role in it, but also it's the nature of people. Not to say that the Afghans, all they can contribute to human society is war and fighting. No, not at all. Don't invade them, and you'll see how they will prosper and produce and build. But my point about this was that whilst we're seeing that, we're also seeing people entering Islam in places you could not have imagined. As an example, I've given examples of people that accepted Islam in Guantanamo from the American soldiers, and there are several of them. But here now you see in Gaza, you see there's a phenomenon of young Western girls in their teens ordering copies of the Quran and accepting and embracing Islam because they see the istiqamah, the strength, the perseverance, the faith of the Palestinians, the likes of which they would never imagine for themselves if they were in anything as close to this in terms of turmoil. So the world of Islam, if you look on the map, you think, wow, it's all cut up into pieces and it's all doom and gloom and it's terrible. But really, actually, we need to be upbeat and look at that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us little victory every day, whether it's somebody holding on to this deen, whether it's somebody that's entering this deen, whether it's somebody protecting his deen, and even those, when we look at the number of shuhada, because we have to look at this way. This is ahad al-husnayn. In Islam, we look at this as ahad al-husnayn, one of the two great things, victory or martyrdom. We've got tens of thousands of martyrdom. For them, that's victory. For us, that's victory. وَلَا تَقُولُ لِمَنْ يُقْتُلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا. Do not say of those who have been killed in the way of Allah that they're dead. We can't say that. بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. They're alive but you perceive it not. And so it's really important for us to look at this. Whilst we don't want a single person to be killed unjustly, we shouldn't look at this as this is a loss. One of the brothers in South Africa, he told me something. He said something which I found very profound. He said, you can judge a nation by the number of shuhada they have. And I found that very profound because obviously we're seeing that in Gaza right now. And it's producing a kind of person that's an inspiration for the whole ummah, but actually for the whole world. It's actually for the whole world.
You can perceive a nation by the amount of shuhada. Sheikh, Palestine has been given shuhada since 1948, if not before. I mean, 1917.
Indeed. And you can look at this. They've been, all of this, if you come back down to it, right? All of this is about defending. Many of them, people ask, why don't you leave? Why don't you leave that land? And a lot of people do leave that land. But those who choose to remain do so because they say we are the guardians, the vanguard. If we leave, this whole region goes away. And they're the vanguard. So they're not just people who are living there. They're the murabitin of this ummah. They're literally the gods, the guardians of that region.
Sheikh, where does that sense of responsibility come from? And do you see that in this generation? Of course, I'm not talking about Gaza. I mean, Gaza has been put in a situation where it doesn't have a choice, some might say. Or it may have a choice. Fine, go to Sinai and you can live. But do you see that in this generation, in the young people, that the sense of responsibility, or is it compartmentalized? Only where there is a struggle, there is that, but the rest of the Muslim world is in deep sleep.
I mean, look, that's a really, really important comparison. It's an important one to make. I was doing leading a jama'ah in khutbah, at a masjid, and brother said, could you make dua in qunut during the salah? And I said, is there a need for it? And they said, look, we want to revive this amongst the Muslims so that they get used to it. And I said, is this only for Gaza? Do we do qunut? Or have you been doing qunut for Afghanistan and for Kashmir and for Syria and for so forth? And they said, well, no, we haven't. I said, well, I will do it, inshallah. But I will tell everybody that you should have been doing this for all of the other conflicts and should have been remembering them in the same way. There were 150,000 at least who died in Afghanistan, close to 1 million in Iraq. And
of course numbers are beyond.
The intensity of what's happening in Gaza, and the fact that it's targeting so many children, of course, it makes your heart bleed like you can't. But let's just remember, I can't remember a single time in history that the Muslim Ummah hasn't been in turmoil, that there hasn't been an occupation, there hasn't been an invasion, there hasn't been torture and abuse. I can't remember a single time. So either we, like you said, rightly, don't respond to things just as reactionaries, but actually say, this is a long, hard road. The deen, following the deen, we were told, the deen is nice and easy. No, it's not. Jannah was never going to be easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تُدْخَلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَأْسَاتُمْ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَالزُّلْزِلُوا. Do you think that you're not going to enter Jannah and you won't be tested like those who came before you? Literally the earth underneath their feet shook. حَتَّى يَقُولُ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ, until the Prophet and those who believe with him say, when will the help of Allah come? They themselves, the Prophet and the believers, أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. So we have to always remember that this deen is going to require all the way through, from cradle to the grave. Don't get complacent. You will be tested because that's the nature of belief.
Sheikh, question regarding maturity of Palestine. Sure, it has brought a certain level of activism or reactivated a lot of people that were kind of gone, on the hayside. But Sheikh, there is activism, but there is misunderstanding of Islam. There is activism, and then there is this cyclical, constant run around the same solutions that have kind of brought us here over and over and over again. Do you see a level of maturity within the Muslim Ummah, or at least in the leadership, wherever that is, of the Ummah, that we are constantly back down in this same mess, that we keep coming back to the same point again, that there has to be a turn, there has to be a paradigm shift?
Yeah, all of those arguments come back again to the same place. Is that, how can you, through activism, get what everybody else has got through, military might, right? How can you do that? And the answer is, of course, that you can't. You can't do it. Do you think Afghanistan was going to get liberated by any marches? No, it didn't. They had to fight back. And so we have to realize the state in which we're in, and that we all, however 1.6 billion or 2 billion, we're a big number. Our numbers are massive, but they're meaningless. And the Prophet ﷺ foretold about this. You're going to be like the filth of the flood water. And the answer to that is because you have in your heart al-wahan, wa qila mal wahan ya Rasulullah, what's wahan? Hubbud dunya wa karahatul maut, which means that you love life, you are connected to life, and that is the most important thing. You don't consider hero, and you are so afraid, you are terrified of everything. Everything with you begins with fear, not the fear of Allah, the fear of mankind and what will be done to you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَالنَّقْصِ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. We're going to test you with something from fear and hunger and loss of wealth and life and possession. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that give tidings to the believers, الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ, when they're tested with the tribulation, they say, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون. We only say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. What do we say? When do we say? Somebody dies.
People die, yeah.
We don't think of the context of the verse before it. And the verse that precedes that is what? Don't say about those who are killed in the way of Allah that they're dead. So if you really want to even just teach that verse to people about, this is the context of that. Not just, somebody he got hit in a car accident. Inna lillahi. That's not the context of the verse, is it? And so we need to teach that to our people to understand this, and we will get there. But at the moment, our numbers work against us. Our numbers really, because it makes the rest, the non-Muslim world says, well, what's Jordan doing? What's Egypt doing? What's Turkey doing?
I mean, it's embarrassing.
Turkey,
they're open about that. Like, what do you guys do?
Yeah, and you have to put your hands up and say, you know what, you're right. And that's why then when non-Muslims come along and set up, we're going to do a case in the ICJ. Yeah, when's the ICJ going to give an opinion, a decision? Oh, maybe 3, 4, 5 years time.
Yeah.
And that's seen as a victory.
Yes,
that's seen as a victory, right? And
that's what Allah.
So that's all we got. And we don't have anything better than that. In fact, the only thing we have, the only people doing resistance. Every now and then a video comes out, and you see Israeli soldiers, Israeli tanks getting hit, and you think, oh, that they're fighting back. That's it. Nothing else. Otherwise, it is a complete massacre, genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and everybody's just watching the show.
Sheikh, hasbunallah ni'mal wakeel. Do you with prevent? I mean, look, Sheikh, I guess is this the war in Israel or the genocide that's happening? I mean, is the Western look? I saw this podcast, and one of the brothers, he was saying that look, everything that the West ever stood for, now Gaza is the graveyard for it. Everything, human rights or anything. Sheikh, fine. I mean, Gaza is graveyard. Does this mean beginning of the end of the Western civilization, or does this mean that, well, as far as values are concerned, as far as it's been doing it for such a long time that now it's just that it's more clear. People are seeing, people are seeing it on their screen. Is this what it is? Nothing changes. It will just go on.
Yeah, I would say that it's a bit of both. It's all exposed. It's all absolutely crystal clear. For the past 20 years, I've been, involved in every legal forum you can imagine, whether it's through the police, giving them evidence for the role of the British in torture, whether it's the International Criminal Court, giving them evidence at the ICC for torture and abuse in Bagram, whether it's judge-led inquiries here ordered by the Prime Minister into British role in torture. I've been involved in so many processes, I can't tell you. And every single time, it's the same conclusion. When it comes to a nation in the West that is guilty of breaking its own laws when it comes to war, they are all above their own laws, all of them. And that is I would say it's an established principle they have rather than anything else. You cannot touch them. So what this should tell us is that the veneer of human rights, freedom, democracy, and so forth will exist for the ordinary person, but it will not exist for the leaderships of these places. And that's because for them, they believe in these things to an extent, but it has its limits. And its limits are that when it's one of our leaderships and we say that, that threatens the very nature of the country, then sorry, we can't uphold our own laws. We can't apply them on ourselves. And that is the beginning of the end of any ideological belief system that you have, because it has the massive flaw in it, which says, yeah, it's okay for us, but it's not okay for you. We apply it only on the ordinary people, but not on ourselves. And with Israel, you can see every single, it's the worst thing. I mean, really, it's like somebody recently on the media said, from the Israeli side, it was, I think, with the ambassador to the UN, he said, well, the Palestinians can just get up and leave and they can go to neighboring countries. And the anchor said, well, isn't that ethnic cleansing? And he said, no, this is voluntary. Yeah, voluntary. How is it voluntary when you just bombed their homes and destroyed them and told them to get out? Every area that you tell them to go to, you bomb it. And she said, well, isn't that what happened to the Jews in World War II, after World War II? And he was incensed.
How
that
can you
some
use this,
kind of comparison has been made. Well, you can't if that's the case, then you shouldn't be constantly quoting the Holocaust, after which the ICJ was set up. But now when it's turned on you, you don't like it. And that's with every oppressor. When you show an oppressor a mirror, he hates the mirror. He wants to break the mirror.
But Sheikh, so now, for a lot of the people, Israel, of course, for the West, it's very clear that Israel is an interest. The West is not willing to get rid of. I mean, because it does the killing for them. It does spies for them. It takes land for them. It watches the whole Muslim world. It's right in the heart of the Muslim world. It keeps the Muslim world divided. Are we expecting that the West will change its interest for the need of the Muslims?
Well, that's a really good question, because Lord Palmerston, who was the Prime Minister of Britain in 1852-54, he said, "We have no perpetual friends, and we have no eternal enemies. Only our interests are perpetual and eternal, and we will follow them." So he was the most honest Prime Minister that's in this regard. And so if interests change, if the burden of being a friend, a bosom brother of Israel, becomes so heavy upon the West, they'll abandon Israel like a bad habit. But at the moment,
and what would that take?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Meaning the Muslim world is uniting, and then this is creating hell for us. So let's just drop it. What does it matter to us?
That's one of them. So that's one of them. If there's one issue that could unite the Muslim world, it's Palestine. It's Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa in particular.
Yes.
Particularly in Al-Aqsa. Maybe Gaza not so much yet, but Al-Aqsa, it has the potential to unite the Muslim world. And let's not forget, the largest terrorist attack that ever killed the largest number of British people in its history, you know who it was? It wasn't ISIS, it wasn't Al-Qaeda, it wasn't the IRA, it wasn't the Taliban. It was the Irgun and Stern gangs in 1948 in Jerusalem in the King David Hotel, and they bombed the British. You know why? Because they weren't allowing the illegal immigration or migration of Jews into Israel fast enough. They'd already said, "We're giving you this land," but they weren't doing it fast enough. And so they were capturing British soldiers, British policemen, hanging them off trees, putting booby traps on them. And so despite all of that, and in the end, they said, let's quickly give it to them. So they bowed to the Jewish terrorism. And so imagine that in reverse. Imagine that now it becomes a place so filled with anti-Western feeling. And we've heard people, I've heard people here from the far right here actually say, you know what, we have put ourselves in the bed with Israelis so much to the point of which we're at war with the Muslims, and we've lost our own identity. We don't even know who we are anymore. You might as well fly an Israeli flag over 10 Downing Street rather than a British one. So things are changing, and the ordinary people on the ground, the quiet majority, as they say, they are beginning to feel it.
Because they're worried that this is going to now, create a situation that they cannot handle. Is that what is the feeling?
Part of it,
you have thousands of people doing protests, right? I mean, look, U.S. I guess the other day, Washington, 400,000 people. But is that what you're saying? That okay, now they can't see that it doesn't make sense what they're doing.
One of the things that are happening. Look at Germany. Germany, of all places, now part of its process of citizenship is that to become a German citizen, you have to accept the state of Israel.
Right.
Well, hold on a sec, guys. Hold on. You are the ones that caused the creation of the state of Israel by your genocide of them. You killed 6 million of them. Now you've gone the opposite way. Anti-Semitism as a term is you don't find it in the Quran, you won't find it in the Sunnah, you won't find it in the Arabic language, you won't find it in Persian or Urdu. It's a Western European term, because anti-Semitism is something that you guys did best. They expelled the Jews from Britain in 1300s. They killed. The pogroms have gone right across the UK, across of Europe. They couldn't go anywhere. They had to escape to Islamic Spain, to Andalusia, or to the Khilafah and the Uthmani Khilafah. So these people detest. It's in their aqidah. They don't practice Christianity, a lot of them anymore, but if they did, they'd say, "You killed our God." Me and Muslims, we don't have a problem with that. We first of all, we don't think he was God. Isa was God, alayhi salam. And secondly, we don't believe God can die. But you, in your aqidah, hate Jews from a creedal point of view. And so let's just remember that. There is a massive hatred. As Allah says, بَأْسٌ بَيْنُمْ شَدِيدٌ تَحْسَبُهُمْ جَمِيعًا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. There's a huge amount of history which is filled with hatred. As I said, that hatred manifested in the biggest genocide in modern times. And still, the world is paying the price. The Arab world is paying the price for what European anti-Semites did. And that can awaken again. It can awaken again easily.
Sheikh, just a few more questions. One side we have Palestine, the other side we have Mecca and Medina, and you're seeing what's happening in Mecca and Medina. I mean, do you see? And then you were just recently in Afghanistan. What's happening in your mind when you see? I see a smile on your face. That's why I'm saying I'm sure you're like, supposedly 400 to 500 cinemas will be opening in this area. Sheikh, Mecca and Medina is you have clubs being opened, you have women dancing without hijab, you have men dancing as if they're not men anymore. I mean, and then you have this whole situation going in Sham. Question here. Has this been, in many ways, historical, in a sense that Sham has always played a very active role in Islamic, in history of Islam? And Hijaz and Najd and these areas has always been very quiet and in a sense of fine. They might have produced Jewish scholars here and there, but Sham has always been a very active, has taken Islam to the world. Do you still see that happening today in the nature of the people and what you're observing?
Well, first of all, this hadith is إذا فسد أهل الشام فلا خير فيكم. Is that when if the people of Sham become corrupted, then there's no good left in you. So they are a reflection of us. And of course, that hadith continues. There will always لا تزال طائفة من أمتي منصورين على الحق لا يضرهم من خذلهم حتى تأتيهم الساعة. There will always be a group of my ummah fighting and victorious upon the truth, and they will not be harmed by those who are treacherous towards them until the final hour. So that's one of the reasons why Sham is so blessed, that there is always a place around, in and around, and there and of course they're at the heart of the meeting with the Western world. So there's always conflict there, but through conflict, often you find
is that
leadership.
The reason for conflict, Sheikh? You have the Mongols coming there, you have the Crusaders came there, now the Americans are there, and then you have the British came there.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's a place with, and even when there isn't conflict from the outside, there's conflict from within, the different tawa'if or the different groups. So there's a constant state of conflict, and that produces its own dynamics. And in contrast, if you look at Saudi Arabia and so forth, what's happening there, of course, there's a change. There's an attempt, of course, a recent attempt through the Abrahamic Accords to normalize Israel, literally to normalize Israel in the Muslim world. And maybe they're coming from an approach. If I want to say, okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, they want to say, well, we want to stop the warring. We want to stop the fighting. We want to let's just be friends, right? And that's where they're coming from. Let's just be friends and normalize it all. But at which expense? And you see, if that was in and of itself one thing, you'd say, okay, they're coming from a political point of view. Maybe they want to have a truce or whatever. But when you see everything else, when you say, hold on, this is for the first time in the history of Saudi Arabia, they're legalizing alcohol in some places.
Yeah.
Like I said, they're opening up the dance clubs and so forth. And there's a move to do something else. They're moving in a different direction.
Changing of curriculum, changing. Well, that happened a while ago now. Obviously, that's why we see the generation.
And the imprisonment of thousands of scholars. So it's evidently, that's not just that you want to modernize, it's that you want to completely reform and change. And that in itself is a place. And then if you add to that, anyone who's your critic, people like Jamal Khashoggi and others who used to be great supporters of the government, and the moment you speak out against, you're going to chop you into pieces. It's a very, very dark side. So there's openly behaving in this way, and then there's if you want to present yourself in a very Western way, but then also you're very dark. Your way you operate is through imprisonment, through torture, through abuse, and all of that. But you want to say, yeah, in the name of progress, we have to do all of that stuff. And there's going to be resistance to that in different ways. My personal view, right, is, for example, for Muslims, mean, alhamdulillah, I did Hajj many years ago. I don't intend to do it ever again. As long as there's governments like this around, I don't ever intend to return to that place. And I think people who say that we want to go for regular Umrah, well, I spend your money in Afghanistan, spend it in Morocco, spend it in Pakistan, spend it in Bangladesh or Somalia. Why are you spending it there for? You don't need to go for it. The Prophet ﷺ did Hajj once in his lifetime, only once. And he did Umrah 4 times, and that was only a consequence of his travel, and he happened to be around there. But people are making Umrah every year, going in Ramadan, and I said, why are you doing that for? What's the reason?
Wasting money, to be honest. I mean, I understand the spiritual side, but I don't know how much, go to the things that matter. But that's one of the reasons, Sheikh, I don't know if what will happen if I go to Saudi anyway, but the issue is that's one reason. But so now, Sheikh, 100 years has been without the Khilafah, 1924, since 2024. Is there, Qutuz coming around? Is there Salah ad-Din coming around? Is there, because, of course, I was reading, like you were saying, Ibn Athir and others, and you look at the history that they wrote regarding what was taking place in this area for 80 years, 90 years, and as you mentioned, the destruction of the Khilafah in Baghdad. And at one point he says he didn't even want to write that history because it's so bloody. But then, Baybaris comes around and Qutuz comes around. But Sheikh, when I'm looking at the situation here now, that kind of sentiment within the political class, I don't see exists. Because unless I'm missing some part of the historical, narrative, meaning some type of history where no matter what, there had to be some type of support for Qutuz and for Baybaris and for others. Today, there is nothing in sight. Other than, of course, Allah Azza wa Jal, there's always,
I mean, of course, we're in a different time completely. We're in the world of the nation state. So we've got to deal. That's the realpolitik. We may not agree with a lot of them. They're false borders created by people sitting in offices, drawing on maps what country will be where, dividing communities in half. That's the nature now of how we are. So in that regard, again, I go to Afghanistan and say that that's a place where we have seen, not through military defeat, in that they defeated physically through in one battle or 2 battles, but through the sheer power of patience and sabr and istiqamah and so forth. And look, I was there the day Kabul fell. I was there. And they were bombing Tomahawk cruise missiles. They were dropping 15,000-pound bombs. They were obliterating the area, as they do with their powerful weapons. And when Kabul fell to the Islamic Emirate, not a single shot was fired. Not a single shot. So sometimes victory and defeat isn't in the nature of, when Mecca was captured by the Prophet ﷺ, nobody was killed. There was no mass killings, no war, no battle. That's it. He came and he said, everybody, he used, La tathriba alaykum al-yawm, no vengeance on you this day, idha fantum at-talaqa. Go because you're free. And Afghanistan, that was that kind of sentiment. They were doing this. So we should, I think, as an ummah say, okay, at least there's some, if we're looking for that, if we're looking through the long, what have they done on Gaza? What have they done on the Uyghurs? What have they done on this? If this is what you want to start, your starting point is already you haven't given people a chance to breathe. There's people there still on the list. There's people they're still carrying out drone strikes that have happened there recently. You fly around, you walk around
Afghanistan.
Yeah, there were drone strikes that took place. I think it was last year. Yes, and
well, I was going to ask you, but then I was quiet because I didn't know what the issue is. Because there's still drone attacks happening.
Yeah, so you walk around Kabul, you hear this buzz.
Yes.
You hear it, right? And it's the drones. So the drones are still operating. So we're expecting for them to take on the whole world and to declare the Islam. And come on, guys, take it easy. We're not living in that world. We're living in the world of the nation state. And if you want to break the concept of the nation state, you're going to need a lot more than just saying, oh, well, this is what it says in the books of Hadith and Seerah and so forth. You're going to need a lot more than that. You're going to need to put yourself on the line and say, okay, I'm prepared to do what I'm telling these guys to do. I'm prepared to lead from the front as well and assist and sacrifice and give. And of course, most people are not. And here's the thing, you see, brother. in the end, when you want to make those historical comparisons from then to now, is each person that makes that comparison, he has to say, am I prepared for whatever will happen? Am I prepared? Because those people at that time, they were.
No, but
because they didn't have.
Let me hold you on this, Sheikh. Let me hold you on this. So when we say, am I prepared, meaning educating the Ummah regarding this nation state dilemma, I mean, a prison, to be honest. I mean, they created very nice institutions in the name of nation states that just imprisoned the whole Ummah, across the world. What does it take? What do you want Muslims or the Ummah or those who care to do? What needs to be done?
Let's just look at something, okay? I never thought I would see it happen in our lifetime, but a khilafah was declared. Right? Prior to that, a khilafah was also declared in Afghanistan. Most people don't know about it, but it was by a man. Not Mullah Umar. He didn't do it. There was a man called Abu Hammam who had a small little group, and he established a so-called caliphate in Afghanistan. After he was kicked out, he came here. Yes, he came out to the UK. He came back to the UK. He lived in the UK. He was receiving income support, which is like welfare from the state, and he still called himself the Khalifa. And so we have to recognize, and then afterwards, some of his movements, they joined the ISIS many years later, and they made takfir of ISIS and were executed by ISIS. I know these guys details like in detail. So the concept of Khilafah, whilst is an important concept, we have to recognize that it's happened in our lifetime. And the results have been terrible and devastating, actually, for the Ummah. If you look at ISIS, it's
because of lack of ignorance, Sheikh. I mean, ignorance played a huge role in this, not understanding at all. Because, all of a sudden, this was part on the scene, right? Without people understanding what it is. Right. Very few people understand, even till today, what Khilafah is. But anyway, exactly. I want you to answer that, because I really want people watching this. I'm sure this is bothering everyone. Okay, what do we do? You said, look, put yourself in the front line. You got to be able to do what happened.
Right. So nobody's asking anybody to go and do anything ridiculous and to harm themselves or others, but at least you have to be prepared.
Ideologically, even understanding.
Sacrifice means you're going to sacrifice your wealth, sacrifice your time, sometimes even your freedom. The word of truth is the best jihad, right? Speaking a word of truth against an oppressor is the best jihad, because you have to pay the biggest price often for that sort of stuff. And in the name of caution, how often have we seen our ulama say, let me stay quiet, let's say nothing, let's do nothing, etc. Right? And if you look at the scholars of old, can you name a single one of the scholars of the four schools of thought that wasn't imprisoned, that wasn't tortured? Even though the person that did to them was a Muslim. They were tortured and imprisoned by Muslim khulafa. And then if you look at so many others, Ibn Taymiyyah famously says, what can my enemies do to me? جنتي وبستاني في صدري أينما رحت لا تفارقني حبسي خلوة وقتلي شهادة وإخراج من بلادي سياحة. He talks about imprisonment. My imprisonment is khalwa with Allah, and killing me is shahada, and throwing me out in my home is tourism. Our scholars have to have that sentiment, that if I speak the word of truth at a time now when it's necessary to do so, even if it means the loss of life, even if it means imprisonment, then we have to be prepared to do so. And that will lead the ummah. That will help to lead the ummah. It doesn't mean that they're going to call for, and this is so important, because when something's wrong from within the ummah, they have to call it out. We have to say that it's wrong, but you're as a person of principle. So if an organization comes along like ISIS and they say, we're going to chop off the head of anybody who disagrees with us, make takfir of them and so forth, and say, well, this is a stain on the concept of khilafah. Call it out. But instead, in the early days, a lot of people were silent, and they said, maybe it is, maybe it's not, and they just didn't know. And we all know that a khilafah what kind of khilafah is going to be built on the blood of Muslims, on the blood of mujahideen, on the blood of muhajirin, on the blood of salihin and siddiq. You can't do that. And so there's been irreparable damage done to the concept of khilafah. Irreparable. And if people want to talk now about, let's talk about this, well, we've had that. It's happened already. Address it. Address the concept of khilafah now, and do you support it? If not, why not? And then we have to come back and say, hold on. It seems to me that if we want something as noble and as big as this, we've got to work to produce the kinds of people who can do it. And That's where our catch-22 situation comes in. There's nobody alive who's lived a khilafah, a meaningful khilafah. Nobody's witnessed it. And so, I can't think of...
Producing means what, Sheikh? I mean, look, I called one of the scholars recently. I don't want to give name. I was just saying, look, let's talk about Babri Masjid. Said, what's the point?
Yeah, well, there's... Babri Masjid is one of many things. The Prophet ﷺ said that he looked at the Kaaba, he said, the blood of one Muslim is worth more than you. All of your building, right? So we've got Muslims. To me, a masjid, if it's destroyed, I don't honestly.
No, I understand. But I'm giving you a sentiment here. Is that, look, what's the point? It's gone.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, Sheikh, but the Muslims in Palestine, they didn't do that to Aqsa. I mean, they could have said that. I mean, it's a building. It's gone. We'll come back maybe 100 years later. But
I mean, look, I think I've seen so many masajid destroyed. Bosnia. Right.
Oh,
they were targeting mosques.
Sure.
Grozny, Iraq, they were targeting masajid, but that didn't stop the people praying. We need people who pray. We need people who pray, regardless of wherever they are, on the mountaintop, in the prison cell. The masjids, alhamdulillah, masjids will be built everywhere. There's a building. It's not flesh and blood. So I think we should be so connected.
Give me a roadmap, Sheikh. What built you the way you are? Let's take this as a final question, because there's so much. Everything you're saying is bringing in another 1,000 questions in my mind. I don't consider myself.
I don't consider myself to be the example to follow at all. But I can.
Look, Sheikh, you are. I think a person like you, there would be, look, you're going back to Afghanistan. You're trying to figure out, okay, how can I help? Maybe develop it. Maybe this, maybe that. Maybe you're thinking, education in the region needs to be promoted. We need intelligent people to do intelligent work. We need, you're going back to many different areas. You're looking, no matter what, even when Syria happened, you didn't, just take a corner somewhere. You went back to Syria. Then you were bothered there. You came back to UK. Then they were imprisoned there. And then they couldn't find anything. And then you went back. And then no matter what, I mean, it's like, bring it on. But because you understood, it seems like there is that idea that, look, haqq is haqq, waja al-haqq, wa zaqa al-batil, inna al-batil kana zahuqa. You have that very clear in your mind. What is that education, Sheikh, that if we want to produce, is that education that you received in the field? Is it the books? Is it the ulama? Is it the environment? Is it the oppression? Certain things that made you who you are? I'm trying to extract an intellectual roadmap out of you so that we can build our youth that way.
One of the things I think that's really important for us, if you look at other communities, they celebrate their prisoners. They celebrate those who struggle for their cause. The most recognized man on the planet today is Nelson Mandela.
Right.
They have statues of him outside the parliament. He's not a Muslim, but he's a person of principle that people recognize, and 27 years in prison. Bobby Sands in Northern Ireland is a guy that everybody from the Republican community loves him. He died in prison on a hunger strike, fighting for the rights of the Irish people. And so I start to think, where are our people in that regard? And if there are principled people, whether they're from our group or another group or this country, there are so many, and yet we're taught to fear them. We're taught to flee from them, to hide from them, to shun them, and that's because we have something known as a hazim al-fikriyah, which is we're a defeatist mentality. We need to find role models, contemporary role models. The problem I find is, I love the stories of the Sahaba, and the Prophet ﷺ is more beloved to me than myself. But relate that to the ordinary person on the street who is seeing role models everywhere else, on every other, whether it's to do with dance models, on the screen, whatever it is. Yeah, whatever it is. In sports, you've got role models. But you don't have a life role model that you can say that is contemporary, that happened in the last 50 to 100 years. If I was to mention the name Abdul Karim al-Khattabi, nobody's ever heard of him. He defeated the largest force of a colonizing, occupying force in North Africa and Morocco. In modern history, 20,000 soldiers defeated in battle. And he's a scholar of Islam, yet nobody's heard of him. I mean, I went to Morocco. Most people in Morocco had never heard of him. I was shocked. Absolutely. I said, you never heard of this guy? Like Che Guevara, Ho Chi Minh, Castro studied him in their battle tactics, and he was a Muslim. And Muslims don't. Why won't we speak about him? They're not going to get in trouble. Talk about Omar
Sheikh, I mean,
al-Mukhtar.
which Muslim is even studying? Forget, okay, Abdul Karim Khattabi. Who's studying Che Guevara? Who's studying? I mean, within the Muslims, you go to and you talk to somebody with Che Guevara. I mean, they're just sideline him like he's a communist.
What the difference is, Che Guevara is not from the Muslim tradition. He's an atheist. But Abdul Karim al-Khattabi is a Muslim. He's a Muslim scholar. He's a scholar of Islam from North Africa, from the Rif region. And we don't know him. We don't know Imam Shamil. We don't know Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi. We don't. And these are great people who fought against the odds. Some were defeated and some lived. Omar al-Mukhtar is the first. We talk about the fight against the fascists, anti-fascists. Man, let's take the first person who ever fought the fascists in the battlefield was Omar al-Mukhtar. And they took him to the gallows. And before, I was reading his life history, they took him to the gallows. Before he gets hanged, you know what he says? يا أيها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي فيها. So he says these words with complete tranquility. The noose is around his neck. He's been fighting as an old man, 70 years old, on horseback with his gun against an occupying fascist force who in the end joined the war with Hitler against the Europeans. And he says, when he's going to die, he says, "Oh, you soul who is tranquil, return to your Lord, pleased and happy." Why is that not an example for the Muslim Ummah to follow, right? And that's what I want Muslims to look at this and say, why are you afraid of this being a role model for us today?
Subhanallah, Sheikh. I'm going to end on this, Sheikh. Because, this is a... Allahumma barik, Sheikhi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you, and may Allah give you success in the things that you are doing, because it's not just ilm, but you are showing us how to implement the ilm into amal. And this is at least when I'm looking at role models, I am looking at people like you. I mean, when you just said that, look, we need to look at live role models that we need to we need them as human beings. We need them, and so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to use you, Sheikh, and raise your status in dunya and the akhirah. And Sheikh, is there any books coming that we need to be thinking of? I've heard that you are writing.
Yeah, I've been in the process of writing for a while, and inshallah, I'm sure it'll be ready soon enough, but it's just taking a bit longer than I expected. Yeah, inshallah soon.
Inshallah soon. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for your time. And please, always come back. We need you, and we need your work, Sheikh. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And for the brothers and sisters who are watching, I want to end with the same ayah as the brother ended. يا أيها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية وادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. And this is an amazing thing to end with, because at the end, that's the roadmap. That is the intellectual roadmap. We need the people to be satisfied with the kind of testing Allah gives you, and the kind of rewards Allah promises, and the kind of struggle that He wants us to be in while we are in this dunya, and what should be our goal to end up by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jannah. Inshallah, we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا